Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. She looked me dead in the eyes across the kitchen table and said, "You don't own me." Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed, like she'd been waiting to deliver that line. The irony hit me. This was the same woman who once couldn't go a day without holding my hand, who used to call just to hear my voice. Now, she sat there sipping her Starbucks latte like I was some stranger she'd already decided to forget. I didn't argue. I just leaned back, watched her for a moment, and said quietly, "Exactly. I just returned the product." Her expression froze. The air between us turned heavy. She didn't expect that answer. She thought I'd plead, explain, or try to fix it. But I didn't. Because by then, I'd already accepted something she hadn't. She wasn't mine, and I wasn't hers. Not anymore. Her name was Claire. We'd been married 6 years. We built a life that looked perfect from the outside. New house, steady jobs, dinner at Olive Garden every Friday, smiles for pictures that didn't mean anything. But beneath it all, there was distance. The kind that starts small, missed calls, forgotten texts, separate screens at night, and grows until silence feels normal. It started changing last fall. She began dressing differently, staying late at work more often, guarding her phone like it held nuclear codes. I didn't question it at first. I trusted her. But one night, she came home smelling like a cologne that wasn't mine. I didn't confront her. I just noted it. The silence became my weapon. By the time she said those words, "You don't own me," I had already stopped trying to. Ownership was never the problem. Respect was. That night, after she slammed the door and left, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the 2 plates she'd set earlier out of habit. The candle flickered between them. 2 plates, 2 glasses, but only one of them still had a reason to be there. I took her plate, rinsed it, and put it away. Then I poured myself a drink and looked at the empty chair across from me. That was the moment everything shifted. The moment I realized freedom doesn't come from letting go of someone. It comes from letting go of the version of yourself that kept trying to hold on. By the time she came back that night, my side of the closet was empty. The truck keys were gone. And she was no longer a wife, just a woman setting the table for one. I didn't leave in anger. I left in silence. That's what confused her the most. Claire always expected emotion from me, a raised voice, an argument, something to prove she still had a grip on me. But I gave her nothing. I packed my things, closed the door, and drove off in my Ford F-150 without looking back. The engine's low growl was the only goodbye she got. The first night away felt strange. I stayed at a small motel off the highway, the kind with buzzing neon signs and paper-thin walls. There was a Waffle House next door, so I sat there for a while, staring at the coffee steam rise as rain hit the windows. My phone kept lighting up with her messages, first angry, then confused, then quiet. I didn't open any of them. She wasn't used to silence. For years, I'd given her my energy, my attention, my forgiveness. Every time she pushed, I pulled back harder. But now there was nothing left to pull. She didn't understand yet, but she would. The next morning, I went back to the house, not to talk, just to collect the rest of my things. The driveway was empty, meaning she was gone. Inside, everything looked staged, like she'd tried to clean the mess before I saw it. The table was set again, 2 plates, 2 glasses. But there was dust on the second one. That detail hit me harder than anything else. It wasn't guilt, it was proof. Proof that routine had survived love. In the bedroom, my side of the closet hung open, half empty. Her clothes were still there, rows of expensive dresses, shoes lined perfectly. She'd built her life around appearances, but behind it all was hollow space. I took one last look, then shut the door. When I left the keys on the counter, I noticed something beside them, her wedding ring. She hadn't worn it in weeks, but now she'd left it like a peace offering. I didn't touch it. Some things lose meaning once they're dropped the first time. As I drove away, I finally opened her last message. It just said, "So that's it." I didn't reply, because yes, that was it. In her mind, leaving was supposed to make me chase her. But in mine, leaving was how I found peace. She wanted to prove she was her own person. She did. And I was finally free to be mine. The first week away from her felt like walking out of a long, dim tunnel. Every sound, every silence, felt sharper. I started noticing the little things again. The smell of coffee in the morning, the way sunlight hit the dashboard, The quiet peace of not having to explain where I was or why. Freedom didn't feel loud. It felt clean. Claire, though, didn't understand clean breaks. The texts turned to voicemails, the voicemails to long, emotional emails. Each one carried a different tone: anger, guilt, nostalgia. It was like watching someone trying on different masks to see which one would make me come back. I didn't respond. Not once. One night, she sent a picture. It was our old dining table. 2 plates again, candle lit between them, captioned, "Still waiting." I remember staring at that image for a while, not out of pain, but disbelief. She still thought this was a game of attention, that if she just looked lonely enough, I'd show up like I always had. But that version of me, the man who gave in, was gone. I started rebuilding my life quietly. Rented a small apartment closer to work, furnished it myself. No shared spaces. No second toothbrush. I made my own coffee every morning before heading out, stopping by the same Target every Sunday for groceries. It was simple, but it was mine. Meanwhile, she began to unravel. Friends we both knew started reaching out, saying she'd been showing up places asking about me, acting restless. One of them told me she'd started showing up at our old spots: Olive Garden, the movie theater, even the little park where we used to sit and talk. Except now, she was always alone. That image stuck with me, not out of satisfaction, but clarity. She was living the same routine she'd built around me, but now it echoed back emptiness. That was the price of taking someone for granted. When they finally leave, the silence becomes unbearable. A few nights later, I drove past the old house. Her car was in the driveway, one light on, the kitchen. Through the window, I saw her sitting there at the table again, a single plate this time, staring into nothing. I didn't stop. I just kept driving. Because sometimes closure isn't something you say to someone. It's the quiet moment when you finally realize you don't need to. By the second month, I'd stopped checking my phone at all. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt earned. I'd started running again in the mornings, something I hadn't done in years. The air felt different at 6 a.m. Crisp, honest, untouched. Every step away from who I'd been with Claire felt like a step back toward who I used to be. But she wasn't letting go. One night, out of nowhere, she showed up outside my building. I saw her through the blinds before she even knocked. She stood there, clutching her coat, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. For a second, I almost opened the door. Almost. But then I remembered every moment she'd made me feel like a burden instead of a partner. I turned off the lights and let her knock into silence. After a few minutes, she walked away. The next day, I found a letter slipped under my door. Her handwriting. I didn't read it right away. It sat on my counter for hours while I made coffee, watched the news, even went out for groceries. When I finally opened it, it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't angry, it was desperate. She wrote about how everything felt wrong now, how the house didn't feel like home, how the nights were too quiet. She said she missed the sound of my footsteps more than my words. That line stuck with me, not because it hurt, but because it was true. She'd spent so long proving she didn't need me that she'd forgotten what it was like to feel safe. And by the time she realized it, that safety was gone. That night, I sat on the balcony, watching the city lights and thinking about how strange it is that love can turn into distance so quietly. It doesn't shatter. It fades, like a song slowly turning down. I didn't feel angry anymore, just calm. A few days later, a mutual friend told me she'd stopped going out entirely. She was working from home, avoiding people. Her posts online had changed too. No more smiles, no more confident quotes about independence. Just silence. And it hit me then. She was finally living the reality she'd created. A world where she didn't belong to anyone, not even herself. I wasn't proud. I wasn't vindicated. I was just done. For the first time in a long time, I realized that love doesn't die in betrayal or anger. It dies in indifference. And I'd already buried mine. One Saturday morning, I stopped by the Walmart near my apartment to pick up a few things. Coffee, groceries, nothing important. I was standing in the checkout line when I heard her voice behind me. For a second, I thought I imagined it. But when I turned around, there she was. Claire. Same soft hair, same perfume, but the light in her eyes was gone. She froze when our eyes met. Then she forced a smile, the kind people give when they're pretending not to fall apart. She asked how I'd been, said she'd been meaning to reach out, as if the letters, the visits, the silence hadn't already said everything. I told her I was fine. She looked at me for a long moment, maybe realizing that this time, I actually meant it. Before I left, she said something that stuck with me. "You seem different," she whispered. I said, "I am." And then I walked away. No drama. No goodbye. Just peace. That night, I thought about how strange it was to see her trying to act normal, like we could just step back into what we had. But she didn't understand. The man she used to know was built around her. The man I'd become was built after her. And those two versions couldn't exist in the same space. A week later, she texted again. Not long paragraphs this time. Just one line. "I miss who we were." I didn't respond. Because what we were wasn't real anymore. It was a reflection of comfort, not love. Still, something about that message made me think. People don't really miss you. They miss the version of themselves that existed when they were with you. Claire missed feeling adored, centered, important. But she never missed me. Meanwhile, my life kept moving. Work got better. I started running longer, eating better, sleeping better. Even my friends noticed the difference. One of them said, "You look like a man who finally stopped carrying someone else's weight." He was right. But I knew this peace wasn't permanent. I could feel it. The sense that she wasn't done trying to come back. Not because she loved me, but because she hated what my absence said about her. And I was ready for it. Because I'd learned something powerful in her silence. You can't lose what you've already let go of. You can only be reminded of how much lighter you've become since you did. The next time she reached out, it wasn't with words. It was a photo. A picture of our old dining table. Same candle, same 2 plates, but only one was set this time. The caption said, "Dinner for one." I stared at it for a long time, not because it hurt, but because it finally made sense. That was who she'd become. A woman performing her loneliness for an audience that had already left. That night, I didn't reply. I turned off my phone, poured myself a drink, and sat on the balcony watching the city lights fade into darkness. There was no satisfaction in her sadness, no revenge in her isolation. It was just symmetry. What she'd once made me feel, she was finally feeling herself. Days passed, and her silence grew louder. No texts, no calls, just absence. I knew her pattern. When she stopped reaching out, it meant she was spiraling inward. And sure enough, a mutual friend called to tell me she'd quit her job. Apparently, she couldn't handle the whispers anymore. People were talking about me leaving, about how fast she'd fallen apart. The same people she'd once impressed now looked at her differently. That kind of attention breaks people like her. One evening, I drove past the old neighborhood again. The curtains in our house were open. She was sitting alone at the table, phone in hand, scrolling through something. Maybe old photos, maybe messages she never sent. The sight didn't sting anymore. It just confirmed what I already knew. When someone builds their identity around control, losing it feels like death. I parked down the street for a while, watching from a distance. Not to gloat, just to see it for what it was, the ending. The final chapter of a story that started with her saying, "You don't own me." She was right. I never did. But I had loved her. And maybe that was the difference between us. I gave freely. She gave conditionally. Eventually, I started the car and drove off, leaving her light fading in the rearview mirror. For the first time, I didn't feel like running from the past or rewriting it. I'd accepted it. Every mistake, every silence, every moment I let her make me feel small, it all led here. She used to say freedom meant doing whatever she wanted. But I learned the truth. Freedom isn't about escaping someone else. It's about not needing to. It had been 3 months since I left, and by then, the memories had started losing their edges. Her voice, her perfume, even the way she used to laugh, it all faded into something distant, like background noise from another lifetime. I'd stopped wondering how she was doing. But life has a way of testing how healed you really are. One evening, I was meeting a friend for dinner at Olive Garden, and as fate would have it, she was there. Claire, sitting alone in a corner booth, stirring a glass of wine that had already lost its chill. When she noticed me, she froze. For a split second, I saw everything in her eyes. Shock, regret, a flicker of hope. I gave a small nod, just acknowledgement, then turned to walk past. Before I reached the door, she stood and called my name. The whole room seemed to pause, just slightly. I turned around, calm, steady. She walked over slowly, her voice low enough that only I could hear. She said she'd been thinking about everything. about how wrong she'd been, how she finally understood what she'd lost. Her voice cracked when she said she wished she could go back. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her. The woman who once made me question my worth, now standing in front of me unsure of her own. Then I said quietly, "You don't need to go back. You just need to learn how to move forward without trying to own everything in your path." Her eyes filled, but she nodded. She said she didn't expect forgiveness, that she just wanted me to know she was sorry. I told her I believed her. And I did. But belief doesn't rebuild bridges that were burned to ash. When I left the restaurant, she stayed behind, still sitting alone at that booth. It wasn't about punishing her, it was about peace. I realized I wasn't avoiding her anymore. I'd simply outgrown the version of myself that belonged to that story. Driving home, I stopped at a red light and caught my reflection in the window. I didn't see anger or pride, just calm. The kind that comes when you finally stop trying to rewrite what's already ended. Maybe she'd heal someday. Maybe she wouldn't. But that was no longer my responsibility. For the first time in a long time, I smiled. Because I finally understood, closure isn't a conversation. It's a moment when you realize you no longer need one. After that night, I didn't see Claire for a while. Life settled into a steady rhythm again. Work, gym, quiet mornings with coffee from the same small Waffle House down the street. I was lighter, sharper, more focused than I'd been in years. Sometimes I'd catch myself smiling for no reason, just because nothing was weighing on me anymore. That's how I knew I'd finally moved on. But peace doesn't go unnoticed, especially by the ones who once thrived on your chaos. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring, but the voicemail that followed froze me for a moment. It was her voice, shaky, hesitant. She said she'd found something of mine while packing and wanted to return it. The tone told me it wasn't about an object. I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but another part, the calm, detached part, wanted to hear her out, not for her, but for me, to see if the storm that used to rule my life had finally passed for good. We met the next day at a small park near our old neighborhood, the same place we used to walk on Sunday mornings when things were good. She was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench with a small box beside her. I could see the nerves in the way she tapped her fingers against it. When I sat down, she handed me the box without a word. Inside was my old watch, the one she gave me on our 3rd anniversary. It still worked, ticking softly between us like a reminder of time lost. She said she couldn't keep it anymore, that every time she heard it tick, it reminded her of how quickly things fell apart. I nodded, closed the box, and said, "Then let it go." She looked at me, maybe expecting me to say something more, something that gave her a crack of hope. But I didn't, because sometimes silence speaks louder than comfort. When I stood up to leave, she stayed seated. For once, she didn't chase, didn't cry, just sat there, watching me walk away. That moment wasn't revenge, it was release. The kind you can't fake. As I drove home, I looked at the box on the seat beside me and realized something simple but final. She hadn't returned a watch. She'd returned the last piece of control she ever had. After that day in the park, the air between us went still. No calls, no letters, no more attempts to reach out. I thought it was over for good, and for the most part, it was. But the strange thing about endings is that they don't arrive all at once. They fade, like echoes that keep finding new corners to bounce off. A month later, I ran into one of her friends at a small Target downtown. She recognized me instantly, smiled politely, and asked how I'd been. Then she said something that made me pause. "Claire's different now," she said quietly. "She's quieter. She doesn't talk about you much, but she's not the same." I just nodded, thanked her, and walked away. But for the rest of the night, those words stayed in my head. Not because I wanted her back. That part of me was gone. But because I finally understood what had happened to her, and to me. We hadn't just lost each other. We'd lost the version of ourselves that existed inside that relationship. And that loss had changed both of us, just in very different ways. That weekend, I drove back through the old neighborhood one last time. The house looked smaller now, stripped of everything that once made it ours. The blinds were closed, the yard unkept, the driveway empty. It wasn't sad, it was inevitable. She had built that home around control, around an image. Once the illusion cracked, there was nothing left to keep it standing. I parked for a moment, not to reminisce, but to close the loop. I thought about the last words she said to me. "You don't own me." Back then, it felt like a challenge. Now it sounded like truth. I never did own her. I just invested in someone who never understood what being a partner actually meant. As I drove away, the sun was setting, painting the sky in burnt orange. I rolled down the window, felt the wind on my face, and let it carry away everything that still lingered: the noise, the hurt, the pieces of the past that didn't belong in my present. By the time I got home, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: complete. She once said freedom was doing whatever she wanted. I used to believe her. Now I knew better. Freedom isn't found in leaving someone. It's found in no longer needing to look back. It was late October when she reached out one last time. I was at home, sitting on the porch, a mug of coffee in my hand and the cold air biting at my fingers. The message came through quietly, just a short line on my phone screen. "Can we talk?" No explanation. No plea. Just that. For a moment, I almost ignored it. But something in the simplicity of her words felt different this time. Less about control, more about closure. So I said yes. We met at a quiet cafe near the edge of town, the kind of place where no one knows your name and the music is just loud enough to fill the silence. When I walked in, she was already there, waiting by the window. She looked older, not in years, but in weight, like she'd been carrying too much of something she couldn't put down. She smiled when she saw me. A small, uncertain smile. Then she said the words I never thought I'd hear from her. "You were right." She didn't mean about the arguments or the ending. She meant about everything: the control, the distance, the way she had mistaken independence for isolation. She said she used to think power came from having the last word, from winning every fight. But now she understood that real power was being able to let go before something breaks. I didn't interrupt. I just listened. When she finished, she looked at me and asked, "Do you ever think about us?" I nodded. "Sometimes," I said, "but not with regret. More like gratitude." She looked surprised, so I continued. "You taught me who I didn't want to become, and who I needed to be to never end up there again." There was no bitterness in my voice, just honesty. She nodded slowly, like she finally understood what I meant. Then she said she hoped I'd found peace. I told her I had. When she left that cafe, I didn't watch her go. I didn't need to. Some chapters don't close with a door slam or a goodbye. They fade quietly, when both people finally stop fighting the ending. That night, I went home, set one plate on the table, and ate in silence. Not out of loneliness, but peace. She once said, "You don't own me." And I answered, "Exactly. I just returned the product." Now, years later, I understand what that really meant. I didn't lose her. I released myself. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.